All right, I think we're ready to roll.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Today we are here with the amazing Katie, also known as Sporjo, and we'll be asking her some questions today. So to get started, tell us about your life as a kid and teenager. What were some of like the extracurriculars you did?
Yeah. I had I guess, pretty like average suburban life growing up. I've lived my whole life even now, within a couple hours of Toronto. I've always grown up near Toronto, gotten to go see concerts, musicals, and all that kind of thing in Toronto. But I've lived in the suburbs. I'm an only child, so I grew up like I guess a little bit introspective, because I don't have any siblings. And in terms of extracurricular, I did so many. I guess like one thing that's kind of funny is in high school, they had this thing where they would take yearbook photos of every single club on the same day. So they would say, okay, chess club, come down to like the auditorium, we're gonna take your picture. Next, environmental club. With me, they were like, Katie, just stay down here. You're gonna be going back and forth because you're in all the clubs. So I've always done so many extracurriculars. Um, the first extracurriculars that I like remember doing would be like swimming. I did short track speed skating for a little bit, but then I realized I was afraid of going fast and I stopped speed skating. And what else did I do? I did sewing, so I learned like how to sew with a sewing machine. Um, Curling was a huge part of my life for years and years. I did competitive curling. Um, I did extracurriculars through school. So my favorite one was in high school, was called Reach for the Top. It was a trivia team. We made it to provincials one year, which was really cool, but I actually didn't get to go because it was the same day as like during Candlelight. But yeah, I did so many things. I tried volleyball for a while. I think I was kind of the person that wanted to try all the things. And not everything fit, but I wanted to try it. So I guess in summation, pretty Norman, normal suburban life, trying all the extracurriculars, trying to do all the things, being that person who was like at school until like 7 p.m. every night because I was doing like five extracurriculars. But yeah, I guess one thing is like I moved schools around a lot. Um, which I guess is a little bit atypical, but I went to five different elementary schools. Um, for a combination of reasons, but that definitely was a bit of a unique experience. I got to make friends in different places. It was really hard at times, but yeah, that was kind of growing up for me.
Yeah. Sounds like a very fun childhood. A lot like similar to me, actually. I do a lot of extracurriculars too.
Yeah,
Must be like a science fair kid thing,
yeah.
actually.
It comes with the territory, I think.
Yes. So I guess our next question is, what was your most memorable moment as a kid?
So the first thing that comes to my head when I think of this is actually, um, it's not like an important event. It's not anything, but like when this is the first thing that came to my head. So I'll tell you this and then maybe I'll come up with something a little bit more of substance. But I remember being being at this like pick your own apple farm with my parents. And they had like this bin of like corn stalks that they had picked from the field. So my mom was like, "Hey, sit on the edge of this bin. I'm gonna take your picture. It'll be like a really nice fun fall photo." Um And she's like, okay, sit on the edge of this corn bin. So I sat on the edge of this corn bin. I must have been like 6 or 7 years old. And then my mom's like, okay, wait, like there's something wrong with my camera. So she like goes to like fiddle through her camera and she looks up and I'm gone. So she's like, oh my gosh, where did Katie go? And I fell backwards into the corn bin. And they like walk up to the corn bin, they see my little feet like, oh. So I think that I mean, the reason that that probably comes to my head is that it kind of just sums me up in, like, a really quick anecdote. Uh, and that I'm the kind of person that, like, really random things happen to. And yeah, I guess I'm a little clumsy too sometimes. But um, other than that, my most memorable childhood memory, um, I guess more like sentimental one would be going to my grandparents' cottage. Um, it's somewhere that I've gone pretty much every year since I was born. And it's in Northern Ontario, and honestly, like, just getting to hang out with my grandparents, my aunt's often there, getting to be there every summer and, like, look back and, like, watch myself grow up through the summers as I go there is really a formative experience, getting to swim and canoe and fish and all those kind of things. That's something I really have valued growing up, and it's something I still value, so that's a memorable experience for me as well.
The connections with family, like, it's always so fun to, like, be with your family and do
Mhm.
stuff. It's, like, the most, like, memorable part of your life, actually.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely value getting to. I have, I guess, a relatively small family compared to a lot of people. But it just means that I'm really tight knit with them, and I've been really lucky in that sense. Because I know that's not the case for everyone.
And I guess moving on to our next question, you have participated in CWSF a lot of times as a participant and an ambassador. So, guys, tell us about your different projects, what motivates you to keep going, and like guess what your favorite part about science fairs is.
Ooh, that's a okay. So yes, I participated in science fairs from grade 7 to 12. I went to Canada Wide from grade 9 to 12, and I've been ambassador, I think I want to say 4 times. And I'm still working at being involved in science fair, which is really important to me, because not only is it really, really fun, it's also great to see people have the same opportunity that I did to get to learn about STEM and have these incredible opportunities to make friends and that kind of thing. In terms of my projects, they're always biomedical engineering focused, um, which is, I guess, a little bit of an allusion to what I'm doing now, which I'm sure we'll get into. But my first project that I ever did, I was in grade 7. I remember there were judges that were, like, really mean to me, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, I don't wanna do science fair again," but then I kinda actually did wanna do science fair again because it was so fun, even though I had a few judges that were not the nicest, but you just gotta pick up yourself and keep going. But that first project was, called Mybrary, and I've always been a voracious reader. So that project there was a computer database that I wrote. So I learned to code, and I wrote a computer database to keep track of all my favorite books, what I've read, my ratings of the books, if I own them or whether I took them out from the library, that kind of thing. Um, in grade 8, I made a program that helps you do some physiotherapy. So it monitors your physiotherapy progress and helps you do that. In grade 9, I made an innovation that helps you remember to take your medications. In grade 10, I made a prosthetic arm that helps you. Oh, no, that was grade 11. In grade 11, I made a prosthetic arm that people with residual limbs, with residual muscle, can use, that can be operated by residual muscle that they have. Going back to grade 10, I made a monitoring system for people in long term care homes. And finale, grade 12 was my favorite project. I made an insole that people can use that can help them tell a little bit about if they're weight bearing properly, or putting too much weight on their feet after things like injury, or with things like osteoarthritis, or different things where you might want to keep a monitor on how much weight you're putting on your foot. And that project actually is in a museum now, which I'm really proud of. It's traveling Canada, so yeah. What was the other part of the question? You might have to refresh.
Um, what was your favorite part about science fairs?
My favorite part about science fairs. It's funny because at the time I remember being like really, really stressed about, like, you know, Is my project good enough? Um, do I deserve to be here? There's so many other great projects. And I think that's just kind of human nature. But that's not the kind of thing I took away and remember. The things that I take away and remember are the friends I've made. Some of my best friends in the whole world I've made through science fair. Um, and I'm positive that they'll be my best friends till the day I die. um, so honestly, my favorite part is the friendships and the shared experiences that I get to have with those friends, because I think a lot of friendship is based on shared experience, um, or shared values or that kind of thing. And science fairs are really great um, jumping off point for having those shared experiences, knowing that, okay, I love science, the people I'm around love science, and getting to go across Canada as well. Huge privilege that I I really value getting to be able to see a lot of the country through science fair as well.
Yeah. You did some like incredible projects. I want to see them all. um, and yeah, science fairs are definitely like a great way to like connect with different people and like meet people who are like actually passionate about the same things you are.
Mhm, absolutely.
And like for our next question, what are you doing now, your career, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So what I'm doing now is I'm pursuing a doctorate. I'm doing something a little bit crazy, and I'm doing what's called a combined doctorate. So I'm one of the first people at my institution that's been able to undertake a combined doctorate, which means that I'm doing my PhD in two different subjects. So I'm doing my PhD in anthropology, which encompasses biological anthropology, which is the study of humans, how we are biologically, socially, how we've evolved, what our genetics mean, what our skeletons tell us. Everything like that is under anthropology, as well as archaeology. I do a lot of archaeology. And then I also do, for my combined doctorate, biomedical engineering. And on first thought, you might think that something like archaeology and biomedical engineering don't share a lot in common. But the common ground is that both biomedical engineers and bioarchaeologists study skeletons. So I get to study skeletons from way back, um, millions of years ago, fossils, all the way to the skeletons of present day people. And I get to combine all that knowledge to learn more about, particularly, I'm going to be looking at osteoarthritis. So, why people get osteoarthritis, what makes arthritis such a problem for us, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I'm at Western University doing my doctorate. Um, I previously did my undergraduate degree at McMaster University, and I did my master's degree at University of Toronto, so I'm doing a bit of a circuit of the Southern Ontario schools. But in terms of how I got to where I am, it's kind of a long story because I went into undergrad for just engineering. And then I thought I'm going to do engineering and I'm also going to do chemistry. I'm going to do both at the same time. Um, and then a few things happened in my life that made me have to stand back from full-time studies. And I decided to take on a degree that they would let me do part-time because engineering is a little bit more difficult to do part-time. And I always kind of had an interest in the courses that were electives in anthropology. Because I remember when I was picking electives for my first year in engineering, I was like, oh, look at those anthropology courses. They're so cool. And the thing that made me take an anthropology elective in the end was I became a really big fan of Bones, the TV show, in the summer between grade 12 and university. And I was like, okay, that seemed like a cool show. I want to do that. So, anthropology, I didn't know whether it was going to be a long term thing or if it was going to be something that I was just a passion of mine that I pursued for a while. But it ended up being something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. But I also knew that I wanted to go back to engineering. So there are actually some scholars out there that are combining anthropology and engineering into something called anthroengineering. And when I found out that I could combine my two passions together, I was like, yes, this is it. So I started doing that and haven't looked back since.
Yeah, definitely. a perfect career when you can like combine all your passions and it's just like an amazing dream come true almost.
Exactly. And I've had people before say, "Oh, you know what? Like maybe you should step back and pick one thing." And I mean, that's a totally valid option that a lot of people like to just laser focus on one thing, and that's awesome. But I've always known that I'm a really interdisciplinary person and that the questions I want to answer need puzzle pieces from different disciplines. So I guess like a little nugget of wisdom I'm going to throw in there is that if somebody tells you like not to pursue something that you're like, yes, this is my thing, they probably just don't understand your motivations and they might not get where you're coming from. Keep on course to what you want to do. It's sometimes hard when you've got people saying, is this the best idea? And I mean, a lot of times people are saying that kind of thing out of different prior knowledge and lived experiences they might have. But in the same token, if you really want something, just go for it.
Definitely a very valuable piece of advice. And I guess another question is there anything like super interesting or surprising that you've learned through your studies
Oh, so
about
much.
anthropology?
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
there's so much. I think one thing that I never realized before I really got into anthropology is, first of all, how variable humans are, but also how similar humans are. So, what I mean by that is that humans are I could talk about human evolution all day because it's just the coolest thing. But humans have so many incredible, really cool differences, whether that be acclimatization to different altitudes. So people that live more at sea level versus in the mountains, what kind of acclimatizations and adaptations that those people might have. Um, there are so many things that make humans unique to our environments, and make individual people unique as well. But on the same token, humans are so similar to each other. It often feels like we can be very different people, and personality wise, of course, we can be very different people. But in terms of our biology, humans can be very, very similar to each other, even when we think we're not. Which is, I think, something that we need to keep in mind a lot of the times. So that in general is something that's a really cool revelation that I've stumbled upon, but also in terms of skeletons, just like how much our life impacts our skeleton. So everything from the moment we are born, even before that, to the moment we die can impact our skeleton. And different things like what we eat, where we live, the kind of activities we do, it's always making an impact on our skeleton. We can learn so much from people based on their skeleton, even after they've passed away. So that's a really cool thing that I think I wish more people knew.
Wow. That's so cool. I didn't
Mhm.
ever think about like how there could be like differences between like someone different living at different elevations. Like that's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
And now, for the rest of the questions, I will pass it on to our STEM minister. And then for people typing in the chat, we will answer your questions at the end.
Okay. Where we audio had cut off, so I wasn't really sure. Okay. So, favorite part of your job?
I think my favorite part is that, so I guess a little like throwback to high school. When I was in high school, I had like a bit of an existential crisis on what I wanted to choose when I went into university, because I had an equal passion for pretty much all the sciences that I'd ever encountered, but I also loved history. History has always been one of my favorite things. I grew up watching as many history documentaries as I could and reading as many books as I could and meeting as many people as I could that have lived through different events. History has always been something I've really cared about. So, I think my favorite part of what I do now is that I get to combine all the things that I thought were separate into one thing, which is anthropology mostly. So, what I mean by that is that if I have the opportunity to work with an individual who has passed away, who I'm working with their skeleton, um, from that, I get to apply physics. So I get to look at the physics of their bones. So, what kind of bending strengths, twisting strengths do their bones have, and what can that tell me about how they've lived? And many people apply chemistry, so you can look at isotopes and different things, often in the teeth, to learn more about what people ate, where they're from. Biology, bones in and of themselves are biology, right? So I know about the skeletal system, about the different parts of bones, what they do, how they work with muscles, that kind of thing. And I get to do history because a lot of the people that I look at and work with lived a long time ago, from tens of thousands of years ago to hundreds of years ago. I have a particular interest in people who lived around the Industrial Revolution, so in the 19th century, around there, 18th through 19th century. So I think my favorite thing is that I get to combine all the things that I never knew could be combined into one big, awesome blob of science. That's an awful analogy, but I get to ask questions using so many different avenues of science and social sciences and humanities. And I get to use all those tools together in my toolbox to answer questions that I didn't know were really possible to answer.
Pretty cool, honestly. I never
Yeah.
even knew about that stuff. So, what advice do you have for students beginning their journey after high school, deciding what they want to do, and going into a university?
That's a really good question. So the first thing that like pops into my head is I don't know if you guys know the like the internet trend right now that's like don't interfere, it's a canon event. Um that's kind of like what's in my mind right now because I know that I can tell you things and I know that they might not be fully realizable until you come back around and look at it in hindsight. And I guess what I mean by that is when I was going into university and ending high school, people were telling me things, and I was like, ah, okay, 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 I'm not sure about that though. And then now I'm looking back and I'm like, yep, they were right. So, the biggest advice that I have that if I were to tell myself if I had a time machine and I could go back to the end of high school, I would tell myself that nothing that you are picking at the end of high school is written in stone or will fundamentally alter the trajectory of your life in a way that cannot be changed. And I think when people are ending high school, they think, oh my gosh, I have to pick something in university or in college or go out into the workforce. I have to pick something that's going to be the rest of my life. And that is more and more untrue these days. It used to be, of course, that people would pick one thing, stick with it, get their pension, head out, and that would be their one thing for life. But in the workforce nowadays, people are doing many, many things over the course of their life. They're doing career changes. And in my own undergraduate degree, many, many, many of my friends, I'd say the majority of my friends, did not graduate with the degree that they thought they were going to graduate with going into university. They found different passions, things that they had never known about, and they followed those passions. So, my biggest advice to people going into post secondary right now would be honestly, pick what you think you like, but leave yourself open to learning more about yourself. And don't ever feel like, okay, well, I've done this for this long, I have to stick with it. You always want to pick the thing that's going to be fulfilling to you, and the thing that's going to be fulfilling to you, you might not even know what it is yet. You might not even have heard of it yet. So, stick on the path that you think is going to be the best, but if that path changes, that's okay too.
Okay, thanks for the advice, honestly. So do you have any good science communication?
Yeah, so science communication is a skill that I always work to better myself at and continue with because I think we need better science communicators in the world and more science communicators in the world. Because we live in a world where, unfortunately, a lot of the science that's being done is not translated readily to people who might be interested in that science, people might be who might be affected by that science. So science communication can be anything from science journalism, in which somebody with a specific journalism background learns about the science and communicates that. But I also think it's really important for scientists themselves to be able to talk about their science in a way that resonates with people who might not be experts in their area. So, my top tips for science communication would first be to think about things in a way that you would like to be taught them. So, it's really easy to get super into your science and all the little details and everything. But when you're first learning something, you're not privy to all those details. So if I sat here and told you about all the little tiny details of the research I'm doing right now, it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense because you haven't built that foundation yet to know what I'm talking about in my specific area. So really start with the building blocks. Talk to people conversationally about the building blocks of what you're doing. Really have a conversation, tell a story. I know that Stuart is really big on telling stories, and I think he's really spot on with that, because science is almost a narrative. Um, when you ask a question, you try and solve a question, it's got a bit of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you really want to kind of stick with that because the human brain really likes stories. So tell things like a story, start from the foundational building blocks, and also multimodal learning. So, what I mean by that is different people learn differently. I myself am a visual learner. I really like things like infographics. Different people might be an auditory learner, or they might be a kinesthetic learner, so learning by doing and touching. So try and disseminate your science in ways that can appeal to different types of learners. So having different, I guess, having your message transmitted in a way that appeals to all different types of learners will make it get to more people. And it'll also help you maybe even understand your own questions better because sometimes if you look at things from a different perspective, it can be really, really helpful.
Okay, great. So what are your top tips for creating a great CWSF level STEM project?
Mhm. My first tip is always going to be do something you're passionate about. Because if you're not excited about it, if you think, "Oh, this would make a good project, but I'm not really into it," you're not going to take as much away from it. The best questions come from lived experiences, come from questions that you encounter in your day-to-day life, come from things that you want to personally know. So pick something that you're passionate about, and that'll carry you through with the momentum all the way till the end. Um, Another tip that I'd have would be to start early. um, it's easy to procrastinate things, but even just start with your background information. Start learning, start reading. Do lots and lots of reading to start out with to learn more about your problem. So, learn about why your problem exists, or why your question exists, how other people have tried to solve it, what has been successful, what has been unsuccessful, what might be a promising venue for the future, what might be a gap that you want to fill. So, doing lots of background reading and background information seeking in order to fill those kind of knowledge gaps that you'll start out with is really, really important as well. I think as well for when you get to presenting a project, so when you're judging, it also comes back down to things like storytelling and having a conversation. So make sure that you can talk about your projects to the point where you can have a conversation about it. Because if you're just rehearsing something and you're saying it back to the judge, but the judge comes and says, "Oh, well, what about this?" You're going to be thrown off your rhythm a little bit, right? So you want to be able to have a conversation and know your project inside out in that way so that you're not really thrown off your rhythm if something goes unexpected or a question comes up that you don't know. So those would be my kind of like top three tips I can think of right now. But yeah.
Great. So why is STEM so important?
Yeah, so that's a really big question. I think STEM is really important for a variety of reasons. I think the pandemic has really shown us why STEM is important. And I think people will also easily forget why STEM is important. Um, but STEM solves problems. Um, so do other fields as well. Don't get me wrong. We need a combination of different fields in order to solve our problems. But STEM at its heart is critical thinking. Um, when you apply science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, you're using tools in a toolbox to answer questions. So STEM's really important because it can help you answer questions both in your own life and in application to humanity, really. Um, I think STEM's something that will solve a lot of the world's problems. We unfortunately live in a world where we have things like climate change. We have an aging population that will need healthcare. And we have complex problems that will need complex solutions. And when you learn to critically think from the ground up using tools from a toolbox, I really like that analogy because a lot of the times people think, oh, solving things is a formula. I have to do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, but it's not really that. You look at what you need, you look at what you have, you look at the tools you have, and you think, how can I fix what I need to fix based on what I've got in my toolbox? So that's an analogy I really like for STEM. And I think STEM's important. It solves problems. It keeps us curious. A lot of the times when we're adults and growing up, we lose a lot of the curiosity that we have when we're kids. And STEM keeps us asking those questions. I know that when I go and I do research, I'm going to be asking questions. I'm going to be asking those things like why, how, because when, if you think of like a toddler and they're always like, well, why? Well, why? Well, why? I'm effectively doing the same thing when I'm doing my research. I'm always asking why, and how, and well, what about if I did this? What would happen? So I think STEM keeps us curious as well. Solves problems, keeps us curious, and honestly, it's a whole lot of fun.
So what has really gotten you interested in doing science fairs?
That's a good question. So the way I got into science fair was in grade 7. My teacher told the class that we had to pick a year-long project. So some people chose to write, like, tried to write a book. Some people entered like different types of competitions that weren't STEM related. But I wanted to try the science fair because I really liked science and I wanted to learn some new skills. So, um, I decided to try the science fair, and from my first science fair in grade 7, I was absolutely hooked because it involved everything I like. It involved the visuals of putting together a board, it involved the people skills of getting to talk to others, it involved the curiosity and ingenuity of getting to make my own project. Um, that's kind of the initial appeal that it had because I really wanted to be able to have those skills and to try out those things and to learn more about science beyond what I was learning in school. Because I really loved what I was learning in school, but I had questions that weren't being answered by the curriculum, and I wanted to go try and answer those questions on my own.
Okay, so it seems like Liam had some questions. So one of them is, what would you have to say to the people that have been struggling with their STEM fair project for various reasons?
Yeah, so I that hits close to home because in my science fair projects, there are a few times where I had to start over completely, for various reasons, whether it be things weren't working or mostly things weren't working. um, and then even today in my own research, there are absolutely struggles. There are times where I'm like, well, why is this the result I got? That I didn't expect that. What's happening here? So the advice I give is first and foremost, persevere through. Sometimes it feels like the world is ending if you've lost some work or if something's not working or if you're running out of time. Um, but what you're doing is really important and it will think of how proud of yourself that you'll be when you get that project done, when you get back to where you want to be with it. So persevere through. Um, I would also say that it's part of the process. So it's not always the most fun part of the process, but it's definitely part of the process to have setbacks because things aren't as black and white as they always seem. So it's really important to trust the process, keep going through, and acknowledge that yes, this is a setback. It's upsetting. Take some time to feel that feeling, and then keep going. So I one thing I can think of is one of my own projects. I had some results that I wasn't expecting, and they didn't necessarily seem like the most interesting results. But I had someone remind me that negative results or uninteresting results are still results. They're still telling you something very important about the world. And if you don't know what not to do as well, then how are you supposed to know what to do? So, acknowledging that those setbacks are part of the process and that they're just as important as forging ahead and having success. Keeping that in mind can sometimes keep things in perspective.
Okay, seems like Liam had another question.
Mhm.
What is your favorite subject in history?
Okay. I have a few favorite subjects in history. So growing up, my favorite subjects in history were predominantly surrounded the Second World War. Um, I found it to be a really interesting and um, unfortunately very tragic part of human history that I think we have a lot to learn from. So I found that period very interesting. Lately, I've been really interested in the Industrial Revolution. So looking at how humans made machines and automated things and moved into urbanized cities. Learning about that kind of part of history really interests me as well. So I've always had an interest in, I guess, more military history, but also in just the history of everyday life. Um, Especially parts that have to do with science because the Industrial Revolution goes hand in hand with so many scientific advancements as well that I just find really cool. So medical history kind of fits in there as well. Um, I haven't really met a part of history that I don't find interesting. So I like learning about any type of history. Actually, when I think about it, my first love in history was ancient Egypt. So I guess that might be my first love in history. But yeah, I could talk for days about different parts of history and learning more about history and I've had the privilege of as well talking to some folks who have lived through different historical events that it's really eye-opening as well. So yeah, history is a really cool thing and I think it's super important because we have a lot of learning to do as humans and looking at history and what we've done in the past is a great way of learning what we should and shouldn't do in the future.
Okay, seems like that's all the questions for today.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much, Katie, and that was very insightful and inspiring. And thank you to everyone who came and listened. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, guys.